My father's voice hit me before the words made sense. "Pack your things, you're leaving tonight." The lock in his hand shined under the porch light, as if freedom itself were cold metal. Mom hovered behind him, wearing her robe like armor, eyes red but dry, and my brother leaned against the kitchen door frame, smirking, already sure of who would win. I hadn't finished taking off my work shoes when the verdict fell. "I told you I quit," I said again, softer this time, like repetition might change the meaning. "Well, then you quit living here," he said, and turned the bolt. Everything after blurred. The thud of my suitcase against the floor, the scrape of my brother's car keys on the counter, the thin November wind crawling through the half-open doorway. I remember the smell of oil from my father's coveralls, the television still humming about interest rates, those small details you shouldn't recall from the night your life shifts. But somehow you do. Behind me my mother whispered, "You'll regret this, Ava," and I almost laughed because she said it like a blessing. Then the door slammed. Jenna picked me up outside the gas station 15 minutes later. Her car smelled of sugar and coffee from the bakery where she had just clocked out. "You finally did it?" she said as headlights spilled across the dashboard. "He did it," I corrected. "I just made a sentence." In her tiny apartment above the shop, we talked until the ovens below started warming up for the morning batch. I told her how I quit the finance firm that morning, how I handed in my resignation letter, printed on resume paper, because even rebellion deserved formatting. She poured cheap wine into mismatched mugs. "They think quitting is failure," she said. I nodded. Maybe it is. Maybe it's allowed. Sleep didn't come. I scrolled through freelance boards until my eyes ached. At 4 a.m., I sent 6 applications for remote design work and 1 to teach painting at a community center I'd never heard of. The next afternoon, a man named Curtis emailed, $50 for a watercolor of my dog. PayPal okay? I wrote back yes, and felt the first tiny click of survival. By the end of the week, I was living on Jenna's couch, painting on the floor, eating leftovers in exchange for sweeping the bakery each night. My parents didn't call. When Jenna tried to say maybe they needed time, I told her the truth. They had 26 years of it. 2 months later, when Curtis's dog painting appeared on his Instagram feed with a caption that said, "Support real artists," a stranger messaged me for a commission. Then 3 more. $50 became 75. 75 became confidence. I moved into a room above a laundromat, 3 bus stops away from Jenna's. It smelled permanently of detergent and faint victory. I painted until the dryers downstairs thumped like applause. Some nights, loneliness sat across from me, eating my dinner. I didn't mind. At least this silence was mine. On my birthday, Jenna surprised me with a second-hand easel and an iced donut with 2 candles, shaped like the number 27. "Make a wish," she said. I wished I'd stop caring whether they were proud. The next morning, I woke up lighter, hungrier, restless in the best way. When a cafe downtown offered to hang local artists' work, I carried 3 canvases on the bus, city skylines bleeding into galaxies. The owner, a woman named Marisol, hung them on brick walls above the espresso machine. They sold within days. When she placed cash in my hand, I felt an almost electric pulse, half gratitude, half disbelief. Everything I'd built, since the night on the porch, had come from my own shaking hands. By spring, I had clients, invoices, even a small tax problem that made me laugh with pride. My Instagram page gathered followers the way lint collects on fabric. But success, however small, carries echoes. One afternoon, Jenna ran into my brother at the grocery store. He'd asked about me, of course, half sarcasm, half curiosity. "Tell her dad says she'll crawl back when the rent's due," he'd told her. I didn't bother replying through intermediaries. Instead, I paid that month's rent in advance and sent a silent message to the ghosts in my bloodline. 3 weeks later, a hospital called. My mother had fainted during choir rehearsal and listed me, inexplicably, as her emergency contact. The nurse's voice was clinical, apologetic. I could have ignored it. Instead, I drove the borrowed bakery van to the hospital, palms sweating the whole way. The automatic doors opened on the same smell I remembered from childhood vaccinations: disinfectant and fear. Mom looked smaller in the hospital bed. My father sat near the window, reading the financial section like he hoped it might cure her. My brother stood drinking coffee, eyes down. When I appeared, their shock was almost theatrical. "You came," she whispered. "You called," I said. My father closed the paper. "Still unemployed?" "Self-employed," he grunted, a language older than apology. Mom reached for my hand. Her grip surprised me. Strong, desperate, maybe regretful. "I miss you," she said. It wasn't forgiveness, but it was the first sentence since that night that didn't sound like war. When I left, no one asked when I'd come back. Summer arrived with heat that made the paint dry too fast. Marisol's Cafe held an open mic art show, and I stood in front of strangers describing my work. My hands shook, but my voice didn't. A local journalist snapped photos, and 2 weeks later, an article appeared online. From corporate collapse to creative freedom, Ava Bennett paints her way out. It was overly bright, a touch dramatic, and it went viral anyway. Within a month, commissions tripled. By September, I'd rented my own studio and hired an assistant. Ezra, 19, too shy to finish sentences, but brilliant with colors. Life finally sounded like me breathing. Then came the message from my brother. "Take the article down. You're humiliating Dad." I typed back, "Tell him not everything is about him." He didn't answer, but 2 nights later, my article link landed on my father's LinkedIn feed with the comment, "Some people mistake irresponsibility for courage." Thousands of strangers upvoted my reply. "Some people mistake control for love." I shouldn't have enjoyed it as much as I did. The silence from them afterward was complete. For the rest of that year, the family remained a collection of names spoken only when old neighbors asked. I learned serenity, or something close, a long inhale that didn't ache. Yet peace is restless. It looks for new forms. Late autumn brought the biggest commission of my career, a mural spanning 40 feet across the side of a downtown youth center. The director said she wanted something that looks like survival. I painted a figure walking through crimson fog toward light. Every brushstroke felt like rewriting a law I hadn't agreed to. Kids from the neighborhood watched every evening. One boy called out, "Did you really get kicked out for painting?" I nodded. He grinned. Cool. The day we finished, the mayor's office shared photos. Overnight, I gained thousands of followers, and art magazines requested interviews. My inbox became a river of strangers saying, "Thank you for leaving." Reading them felt like oxygen. At December, Jenna's Bakery held its 10th anniversary celebration. My entire studio team came. Toward the end of the night, while the DJ played songs from 20 years ago, I stepped outside for air. A familiar voice said my name. My brother stood by a parked car, hands in pockets. "Mom wanted me to invite you for Christmas," he said. I laughed softly. "That's brave of her. She really means it this time." "Does Dad?" He shrugged. "He won't stop her." That was the closest he'd ever come to apology. I didn't answer until the drive home. I texted him, "Tell her thank you, but I already have plans." By New Year's Day, those plans became real. Marisol and I signed the lease for a shared gallery space downtown. Half cafe, half art room. We called it the Second Door. On opening night, I hung a single canvas near the entrance. A woman on a porch, surrounded by snow. Suitcase beside her. The light from inside spilling across her boots as she walks away. No signatures, no artist statement. Just the story that started everything. People poured into the new gallery like warm light. Marisol handled the register, laughing with the barista while Ezra moved through the crowd, refilling cups of cheap red wine. The smell of paint still lingered under the sugar and coffee. I'd been afraid that no one would come, but at 7:30, the street outside was lined with cars, and the sound of conversation floated through the cracked windows. "It feels alive," Jenna whispered beside me. She wore her bakery apron over a black dress because she'd come straight from work. "So do you," she added, and nudged me toward a man from the local newspaper who was waiting with a recorder. He asked about inspiration, sacrifice, family. I gave him careful half-truths about change, risk, and how sometimes you have to burn a bridge to see the landscape. No one needed to know the rest. When the questions ended, he glanced at the unsigned painting near the entrance and said, "That one looks personal." I smiled. They all are. Later, after the crowd thinned, I locked the front door and turned off the gallery lights. The only illumination came from the street lamps, bleeding through the glass. I stood before the painting, the woman on the porch, and finally allowed myself to breathe. That story used to be a wound. Now it was pigment. Ezra was wiping tables behind me. "Should I cover this one for the night?" he asked. "No," I said. "Let her keep watch." For weeks after that, everything felt suspended. Sales continued steadily, reviews arrived, the rent was paid on time. Yet inside me, there was a strange quiet, an unfinished sentence. Success, it turns out, doesn't erase absence. It only frames it differently. When the mail arrived one afternoon with an envelope addressed in my mother's handwriting, I knew that quiet had been waiting for this. The letter said she'd seen photos of the gallery online and was proud of me. She wanted to visit, if it wouldn't cause embarrassment. She added that Dad had retired due to health issues and that Sam was engaged. At the bottom she wrote, "I may not have shown it, but I've always loved you the only way I knew how." The words blurred. I left the letter on the counter for 3 days before replying. My response was short. "You can come by any time during open hours. The gallery belongs to everyone now." She arrived on a humid Tuesday afternoon, wearing a blue dress that looked too formal for the space. She walked slowly from wall to wall, pausing at each painting, as if memorizing proof. When she stood before the porch painting, her throat tightened. "That night," she said, voice brittle, "I thought we were teaching you discipline." I didn't answer. She stayed a few minutes longer, touched my arm, whispered, "I'm sorry," and left before anyone could see her cry. For a long time, I stared at the empty doorway after she disappeared. Forgiveness didn't bloom suddenly. It was quieter than anger, like fog moving across water. A month later, I received a call from Sam. "Dad had another stroke," he said. "He's asking for you." I went because closure has a pull stronger than resentment. The house was smaller than I remembered, or maybe I'd outgrown its ceilings. My father lay propped against pillows, the newspapers replaced by oxygen tubes. His voice rasped like sandpaper. "You did well for yourself," he murmured. I said thank you, unsure if it mattered. He studied my face for a long moment and then motioned toward a box on the dresser. Inside were my old sketches, charcoal portraits, color studies, pieces I thought he'd thrown away. "I kept them," he said, and for the first time in years, my anger cracked. He took my hand briefly before sleep returned to him. When I left, I didn't cry. I simply felt release spread through my chest like warmth after frost. His funeral was small, plain, unceremonious. I stood beside my mother beneath slate-colored clouds and realized grief can be calm when the war ended years before. Afterward, she moved closer to the city. Sometimes she visited the gallery, sitting quietly near the window, watching customers come and go. She never lectured again. We spoke mostly in gentle fragments about paint, about Jenna's bakery muffins she still adored, about the weather. Time moved differently after that. Months folded into each other, each painting marking one layer of healing. Commissions grew, exhibitions expanded beyond the state, and one morning, a national magazine requested an interview titled "The Woman Who Walked Out and Built Her Own Door." They photographed me standing under my mural at the youth center, while the kids from the neighborhood waved paintbrushes behind me. When the issue hit stands, the opening lines mentioned the night I was thrown out, but ended on the gallery's bright awning and the word hope printed in bold. I kept a single copy on the studio shelf. But the part that mattered most was quieter. Every Thursday, I hosted free art classes for teenagers who'd been kicked out or abandoned. Kids who reminded me of myself at 17, needing proof that leaving could also mean beginning. One of them, a girl named Riley, painted suns in every picture no matter the scene. She'd been living in her car before enrolling. The day she sold her first canvas, she gave me $50 cash and said, "For letting me breathe." I tried returning it, but she pressed it into my palm. "You once told me we pay forward what saves us," she said. That night, locking up, I realized she'd described precisely what I'd been doing without naming it. Every act of creation since that night on the porch had been repayment into the same universe that once faulted me for dreaming. Years passed like that, a rhythm of teaching, painting, and the occasional quiet dinner with my mother, who had learned the difference between worry and control. Sam visited twice, both times awkward but civil. The second visit, he brought his newborn daughter and asked if I'd paint the nursery walls. I almost said no out of old habit, but when I saw him holding the baby too carefully, as if terrified she might break, something in me softened. "I'll do it," I said. The mural took a week. Clouds, paper planes, one open door letting in sky. The day I finished, he stood staring at it. "Dad would have liked this," he said. "I don't know," I replied. Maybe he learned to. We both laughed. Strange, cautious laughter that didn't hurt. One rainy evening, years later, I stayed late at the gallery, finishing inventory. Under rolled like slow applause outside, I brewed a pot of coffee and sat beneath the porch painting, the original still hanging watchful by the door. The reflection of the streetlights shimmered across its surface, and for the first time, I imagined the woman not as me leaving, but as anyone walking toward their life. The gallery was silent except for the hum of the fridge and the heartbeat sound of rain against glass. That was when I finally understood what I'd spent years trying to prove. Leaving had never been about rebellion. It had been about arrival. I locked up and stepped into the rain without an umbrella. The city smelled of wet asphalt and new beginnings, identical almost to that first night when cold air bit my cheeks as I stood outside my parents' house, clutching a single suitcase. Only now, the same air tasted clean, not cruel. I walked the 3 blocks to my apartment, soaked to the bones and laughing. The door clicked behind me with that same metallic certainty. Freedom still burned like frost sometimes, but it was mine. I made tea, sat by the window, and opened a blank canvas. Habit more than idea guided my hand. A simple image started forming, a house glowing at night, its windows, but bright the corner under the trees. Another smaller house built of light entirely. I didn't know if it was finished, but I signed my name anyway. Maybe some doors stay unlocked. Maybe that's how you know the story's done. And when I turned off the lamp and the city outside dimmed into sleep, I realized the single perfect sentence I had been waiting my whole life to believe. There are worse things than being thrown out, never walking out at all.